Hey everybody, welcome back to 8th grade Algebra 1. This is Mr. Mannion. I'm going to cover your coordinate plane today, which is a review over your 6th and 7th grade TEKS. So let's begin. We're going to start with some key vocabulary. Here in the very center, we want to mark that. What I want you to think about is, what do you recall that point being called? Directly in the center. You've already known this. Think about it. All right. Everyone, check and make sure. You should have said that this was the origin. The origin marks the very center of our coordinate plane, and that's denoted as 0, 0. All right, next up, we have our axes, because there's multiple of them. There's two. We have our vertical axis that's going straight up and down the middle. And your vertical axis is the y-axis. That's your dependent variable when we talk about that in class. And that's, again, your y-axis going up and down. Going left and right, our horizontal axis. Is our x-axis. Again, horizontal meaning left and right. We use both those axes in order to help us denote points anywhere on the coordinate grid. So far we've covered the origin, which is our center point. We've covered the y-axis and the x-axis. I'm going to go and erase that. Now I want to cover the units. So it's very important for, on your coordinate plane, for you to recognize what the units are, what we're counting by. Because sometimes you may be counting by ones, twos, tens, and so forth, right? It depends on the information that you need or that's given. In this example, it's numbered off as 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, so it looks like we're counting by twos, but actually, because there's tick marks in between every number, we're counting by ones. So if I wanted to, I could write a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you can see this coordinate grid goes in 10 units in every direction, left, right, up, and down. And so our units in this case are ones. Next up, once you know your units and you know your axes, our coordinate plane is sectioned off into 4 different quadrants. And notice my hand, how it went like this. That's going to be a counterclockwise direction is how we're going to name them, or number them actually. Because up here in the top right quadrant, this is going to be quadrant 1. Now, it looks like I wrote an I, but here in algebra, we denote the 4 quadrants by using Roman numerals. Okay, so this I is actually a 1 in a Roman numeral language. So, over here, if we're going counterclockwise, this would be Roman numeral 2. Following the pattern, we have quadrant 3, and last, written in Roman numerals, we have quadrant 4. Actually, I guess that doesn't go all the way. Right there. Yeah, quadrant 4. Those are the 4 quadrants. And one way to kind of help denote that is, if you start over here, what I typically do is I draw a C with a little arrow. That's because we're moving in a counterclockwise direction, and that helps me remember how I'm going to name them. Quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, so now that we know where the quadrants are, we've got our basic vocabulary. We want to be able to graph points. And this is where I see a lot of students get mixed up, especially because of just like everything kind of seems the same. Well, the way that we're going to be able to graph points is by following our notation of x, comma, y. What we want to do is we want to have an x value and a y value in order to denote a point. So, you're like, Mr. Manning, how do I remember like which one goes first? Like, it's x, y, y, x, is it ever gonna change, you know, things like that? It's never gonna change, but one way for you to remember that x always goes first is just think of the alphabet. When you're saying A, B, C, D, E, so on, right? What goes first? X, of course. So x is always the first point that we denote, or x is always the first coordinate in a point. So, let's begin. What if we wanted to plot the point 3, 5? I'm going to write that down. 3, 5. So we know that 3 represents our x value. So I'm going to write an x. And we know 5 represents our y value. It's always a quick tip to write those out if you need help remembering them. So what that tells us to do is I want a positive 3 in my x direction. So remember, x only moves left and right. And if you look here, here are the negative x's and here are all the positive x's. So this tells me I want to go 3 to the right. Here's where 3 is. So I'm putting I put my finger there. But I do want to emphasize, I'm not putting a point there. That's actually 3, 0. We'll get to that in a second. But, right, that's only one piece of this coordinate. So, I have my finger there for safekeeping. What I'm going to do next is I want to move 5 in the y direction. Keep in mind, these are all the negative y values. Here are all the positive y values. So since this is a positive 5, I want to move up to get to positives. So I'm going to count from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can label that point as 3, 5. All right. Well, what about some negative numbers? You know what? So let's plot a point in every quadrant. Here, this point was plotted in the first quadrant. If I want a point over here in this quadrant, notice what type of x values are we going to need? Take a second and think. What type of x values will we need in order to plot a point over there? Well, we're going to need negative x values because we want over here on the left side. What type of y values? Positive. So let's try -3, 9. -3, 9. Well, I want to start out by going left to -3 for my x. And then 9 tells me we want to go up 9. So here's my point at 3, -9. Quickly, I'm going to go over 2 more points. What if I want one here in quadrant 3? That's going to be a negative x and a negative y value. So let's make up a point. Let's say that this is going to be -2, -6. Again, this tells me to go -2 first in the x direction and -6 in the y direction. So -2, -6. And finally, if we were going to plot a point over here, I'm going to do this a little bit backwards. What about this point? Let's call it right here. Where is that point? Take a second and look. All right, you got it? That point, if we go with the x direction first, that point is at here. So that's 7, comma. Well, if we go down here in the y direction, we see it hits the axis here, and so that's at -7. So if you said 7, -7, you were correct in identifying that point. So today we covered our coordinate plane. As a quick refresher, we went over our vocabulary, key features calling the origin, our axes, x and y axis, and our quadrants. And then we covered our graphing points. And when we graphed our points, you got to make sure that you start with your x coordinate first and then your y coordinate, and you can plot them anywhere on the graph as you need. Everyone, thank you for watching. Let's get some practice in.